Hi there, my name's Gary Bridges. I'm the new SHESQ manager, joined the Alliance just before Christmas, and I'm going to talk to you about safety by design from a conceptual point of view. I always start with this slide when I start talking about safety by design for a particular reason, just to show that history isn't necessarily a good guide to the future. These buildings here were built in 3 different decades, and yet they all catastrophically failed. All predictable, extreme cold, heavy snowfall. Some of the buildings they were built in 3 different decades before they all fell in pretty short timescales. And some of the issues with that, people didn't think about some of the catastrophic failures that could happen if you had a coming together of certain factors: extreme cold, heavy snowfall, and over 120 odd people lost their lives in those incidents. As you can see from these pictures, if you don't design in a method of people accessing equipment or plants, they can come up with ingenious ways of doing it for themselves. Some of you may recollect this individual, Michael Jordan, the most outstanding basketball player of his generation in the 90s. I think as one commentator summed up, there's Michael Jordan and then there's the rest. And at the end of a long, hard season again, where the Bulls won the championship for the 5th year running, Jordan was the top point scorer and the player of the year yet again. The commentator asked him, "What are you going to do in the break?" And he said he was going to have a week off and get straight back into training. And the commentator looked at him amazed and said, "Why bother? You're already the undisputed number 1. Why would you possibly need to practice?" And his response was, "What got me there keeps me there. If I don't improve year on year, relative to the others, I'll get worse." And I think it's an important message that it doesn't matter how good you are in your field, there's always scope for improvement. You can always be better. And nobody typified that more than Michael Jordan. So what's safety by design all about? It's about eliminating hazards altogether, removing the need to work at heights, removing the need to manually handle equipment and plants. And where you can't remove it altogether, it's about minimising the risk, the residual risk, to make sure that we control it. We've designed it as safe as we possibly can in light of the knowledge that we have at that time. I think the title sums it up. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If a designer designs in a hazard, particularly in substations, we have to maintain and operate that equipment for 40 years. That's its life cycle. So if we've designed something in that has inherent safety risk, we're in the realms of managing it and having workarounds, whereas the designer could have removed that risk altogether in the first instance. And there's a legislative responsibility to do design work and make sure that we capture the safety aspects. And some of the quotations were quite damning really in the HSE report, looking at the designer role in CDM. Half of all accidents in construction could have been prevented by designer intervention. Not just persuasive, but absolutely convincing designers can do more. The world is changing, nothing's static. I'm 41, I know I look a lot younger, but I had a heavy paper round. But even in my lifetime, the way things have changed is unbelievable. We had 1 computer in the whole school and the teacher hadn't been on the course, so we never got to use it. They're in every classroom now. It's incredible. But this picture sums it up for me. The world's safety first car. Look at that picture. I can't see any safety features at all. There's no seat belts. It does say it's got the world's most luxurious seat. But in terms of safety, I can't see anything. But in 1953, that was state of the art. And the designer could have been be forgiven for saying, well, we don't need to improve on that. That's it, we've reached the pinnacle. But history has told us something different. If we look at cars now, all the different things, crumple zones, ABS, airbags, seat belts, the list is endless, and we expect that as a matter of course now. Not only that, we want it to be environmentally friendly. Going back to when I was a youngster, the main thing was what colour was it? How fast could it go? Things have moved on. Our expectations have moved on. Anybody want to hazard a guess what that was the design for the first? I think I've done it quite a few times, this presentation. There's only one time somebody's guessed right. It was actually the original computer mouse. But we've moved on. We now know that it causes ergonomic issues with shoulders and wrists. So we've ergonomically designed a wireless mouse that eliminates that hazards with operating the mouse. For some of you who know me, always been involved in lifting weights. Even there, we've moved on. Why did we have to have solid plates that were difficult to lift up? Why not design them so they've got holes so they can be manually moved around a lot easier? So even in the macho world of lifting weights, people have said, well, hang on a minute, we can design it differently. We can move on. Again, we often spend a huge amount of time looking at the technical aspects of pieces of equipment, its capability, what does it need to lift, what operating force does it need, but can the individual actually generate that force? What is the implications if they can't? What is the risk to injury? What is the mode of failure? These are all things that the designer has to consider as part of designing equipment and looking at the buildability, the maintainability, and also the demolition and removal and decommissioning at the end of the process. That's all within the designer's remit. And what is a designer? It's anybody who has any impact on that end structure. It's quite broad. Again, looking at these pictures, the picture on the left, that's common practice in a lot of places even today. But it doesn't have to be that way. There's mechanical mechanisms of moving pieces of equipment, heavy bags around. We don't need to manually move them around. And again, that's within the designer's remit to consider, how can we do that? How is the person going to get things from A to B? You won't find any more macho world than the military. Let's face it, ultimately, in the course of action, they can be killed. And yet, there's a whole website and a whole team within the US military looking at health and safety, ergonomic issues, and a huge department looking at safety by design. Because they've recognised they need to make sure their military people are available for active service. And some of the things they've looked at is manual handling, pushing, even grasping things and how that impacts on their people and whether they're available for service. And some of the design errors that they've come across, they spent huge amounts of money designing military vehicles, and at the last minute suddenly thought, how do we get the guys off it? In a combat position with bullets flying here and there and bombs going off with an 80-pound pack on your back? The answer was to retrofit a ladder on the end. I'm not too convinced I'd be too happy coming off there with bombs and bullets going off around me. So they've recognised they need to do more. Sometimes their design errors have proved fatal. Designed a method of ejecting pilots out of fighter planes. Unfortunately, there wasn't adequate clearance, and some of the pilots were killed, which meant a redesign of the cockpit and the seating arrangement. But that should have been picked up in the design. We didn't need to lose an active serviceman before they picked that up. And again, it's not just at the high level. They're looking at back injuries, shoulders, neck. When they've looked at their stats, their biggest claim civil claims is to do with ergonomics. And it's a huge amount of money, running into hundreds of millions of dollars. Not only the civil aspect, these people are then not available for active service. So even in our world, which is a high risk category, electricity utility, even guys in a much more high risk environment are still considering all these design issues. And really, just to sort of close off, just recognise that where we are today and the journey we've got to get there and the mentality we've used isn't going to take us to where we need to be. Think back to the car in the 1950s. That took somebody's thought process to move it on. And just as the last one, if ever you go to St John's Wood substation, be careful you lock the door. So really, that's just sort of a bit of an overview at a high level about what safety by design means to me. Prior to joining the Alliance, Safety by Design I was one of the main leads within National Grid on that topic. And as part of that, I did a lot of work with a colleague who's now in the South East Alliance, John Nixon. And he's going to talk about a lot of the initiatives we did and where we managed to change people's perception and change people's principles on design to improve safety. So I'd like to welcome John Nixon onto the stage to talk about that. Thank you very much.